There's a moment in every generation when people finally admit something they've been afraid to say out loud. We are overwhelmed, not by war, not by famine, not by the kind of chaos our ancestors survived. We're overwhelmed by our own minds, by the constant pressure to perform, by a digital world that never stops screaming for attention, by the quiet fear that we're not enough no matter how hard we try. And for millions of Americans navigating burnout, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion, no modern theory seems to offer a way out. That's when a Scottish psychologist walked straight into the heart of this crisis and asked the question no one else dared to ask. What if the solution isn't new at all? What if the antidote to the modern American mind was written 2,000 years ago? Donald Robertson once put it in a way that hits harder the more you think about it. Most people aren't suffering because life is difficult. They're suffering because no one ever taught them how to think. That line echoes something the early Stoic master Chrysippus believed long before the United States even existed. A man's character is his fate. In the middle of a culture obsessed with speed, noise, and constant stimulation, both ideas collide with unsettling clarity. If your fate is shaped by your character, and your character is shaped by the way you think, then the real battlefield isn't the economy, politics, or society. It's your mind. And that's why Donald Robertson isn't just reviving Stoicism. He's rebuilding the mental foundation that modern America accidentally abandoned. Welcome to the Stoic Lighthouse. Let the Stoic Lighthouse guide you toward peace and wisdom. If this message resonates with you, like and subscribe. It helps this message reach more people who need it. Number 1, the moment everything broke. Why modern psychology couldn't heal the modern mind. For years, Donald Robertson sat across from patients who looked perfectly functional on the outside, yet carried a storm inside their minds. They were Americans dealing with panic attacks between meetings, parents collapsing under invisible pressure, professionals who had everything except inner peace. Donald had the training, he had the methods, he had the tools that modern psychology insisted were enough, but something wasn't working. Session after session, he saw the same pattern emerge. People weren't breaking because life was unbearable. They were breaking because they had never learned to face life with a trained mind. And no matter how advanced therapy became, it couldn't fully address that missing foundation. Donald has said many times that psychology gave him techniques, but philosophy gave him clarity. And nothing captured that realization better than one of his most striking reflections. We keep trying to fix emotions without fixing the beliefs that create them. This insight gains even more strength when paired with the ancient voice of Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, who once taught, "Man conquers the world by conquering himself." Here, ancient and modern collide with unsettling precision. Donald realized that the issue wasn't emotional chaos, it was intellectual neglect. People weren't taught how to question their assumptions, how to confront their fears, how to reshape the lens through which they interpret their experiences. And without that foundation, every therapeutic technique became little more than a band-aid on a fracture. Psychology could describe the storm, but Stoicism taught how to walk through it. So Donald went back to the place where philosophy and psychology first shook hands. He revisited the thinkers who saw the human mind long before any diagnostic manual existed. He saw how their methods matched the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. And he understood something profoundly uncomfortable for the modern world. Our minds are not broken, they are untrained. And training requires discipline, humility, and the willingness to confront our own thoughts. In a country built on constant movement, Donald chose to pause. In a culture obsessed with upgrading everything external, he chose to upgrade the internal. And in that choice, he found what modern psychology had been missing, the bridge between scientific insight and philosophical depth, the place where emotional strength is not a reaction but a practice. Not a gift, but a choice. Number 2, the ancient mentors who still train the mind today. When Donald Robertson returned to the roots of Western philosophy, he wasn't searching for poetic wisdom or historical trivia. He was looking for a blueprint, a system of thought strong enough to survive 2,000 years and still guide a modern mind drowning in pressure. He found exactly that in the teachings of Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. But he also uncovered something Americans rarely hear about, the intellectual backbone behind them. Thinkers like Chrysippus, whose ideas shaped the entire logic of Stoicism, and Cleanthes, whose reflections on discipline echo through the centuries. For Donald, these men weren't relics. They were coaches, mentors, therapists of the ancient world who understood the human mind with a clarity that modern society desperately needs. He often emphasizes that the most profound truths are not hidden in complexity. They survive in simplicity. As he once said, ancient philosophy wasn't designed to be admired. It was designed to be used. That practical spirit aligns deeply with a powerful teaching from Cleanthes, who warned the distracted citizens of his time with a line that sounds even more relevant in the United States today. Fate guides the willing, but drags the unwilling. In a culture of endless scroll, instant gratification, and emotional overstimulation, that message becomes almost painfully literal. Many Americans aren't being guided through life. They're being dragged by it. Donald saw that Epictetus trained his students like a mental athlete trains for a championship. He stripped away excuses, he confronted illusions, he taught discipline as a form of inner freedom. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by war and political pressure that would crush most people today, used philosophy not as ornament, but as armor. And Chrysippus, the great system builder, taught that emotions are not random waves that hit us. They are judgments we create, and therefore judgments we can transform. This is the part that resonates deeply with the American mind. The idea that emotional strength isn't inherited. It's built, not by crushing feelings, but by clarifying beliefs, by questioning thoughts, by practicing the mental equivalent of lifting weights. That is why Donald doesn't present Stoicism as an ancient curiosity. He brings these voices into the present, into boardrooms, military programs, therapy sessions and classrooms across the country. Where American culture demands resilience, Stoicism provides the tools to build it. And where modern psychology often ends, ancient philosophy begins. Number 3, the only rule that ends. Anxiety, what you control and what controls you. Across the United States, anxiety has become a national epidemic. People wake up already bracing for impact. They obsess over outcomes they cannot influence, replay conversations that already ended, and catastrophize futures that may never arrive. Donald Robertson saw this pattern so often in therapy that he eventually uncovered the root of it. Americans are trying to control things that were never theirs to begin with. They fight battles in other people's minds. They try to force certainty from an unpredictable world. They cling to the illusion that life should bend to their expectations. And when it doesn't, the mind fractures under the pressure. Donald often summarizes this truth with a clarity that stops people in their tracks. You don't need a calmer world. You need a clearer mind. That insight aligns perfectly with one of the most powerful teachings from the early Stoic Musonius Rufus, a thinker Americans seldom hear about, but who shaped the moral backbone of the philosophy. Only the things that are truly ours can be taken into our own hands. When you place these ideas side by side, a map emerges, a kind of mental compass, a guide through the storm. Donald realized that almost every emotional collapse begins with a simple mistake, confusing influence with control. You can influence your health, but not guarantee perfect outcomes. You can influence relationships, but not command how others feel. You can influence opportunities, but not force them to appear. And yet, Americans are taught from childhood to believe that hard work guarantees success, that effort ensures results, and that failure means personal inadequacy. This cultural myth fuels the anxiety that Donald sees every day. Stoicism breaks this illusion by drawing a sharp line through the center of your life. On one side, your judgments, decisions, actions, and values. On the other, everything else. That separation is liberating. It releases you from the emotional gravity of outcomes. It reminds you that your energy should flow into the part of life you can shape, not into the swirling chaos you cannot. This is where Donald's approach becomes revolutionary. He doesn't tell people to suppress fear or silence their emotions. He teaches them to challenge the beliefs that create those reactions, to ask questions like, is this under my control? Is this thought helping me or harming me? What part of this situation is actually my responsibility? This isn't avoidance, it's mastery. And Americans who learn this rule discover something shocking. The world didn't become less chaotic. They simply stopped giving the chaos permission to rule their minds. Number 4, Stoicism as a path to leadership and mastery of self. The United States has no shortage of people in positions of authority: CEOs, commanders, elected officials, team leaders, coaches, managers. But there is a crisis spreading quietly through every level of leadership in America. People can direct others, but they cannot direct themselves. They can give orders, but they cannot govern their impulses. They can run companies, teams, and institutions, yet struggle to run their own minds. Donald Robertson realized early in his career that this gap between external authority and internal discipline is where most leadership collapses begin. And it is exactly where Stoicism shows its greatest power. Donald often says that a leader isn't someone who controls outcomes. A leader is someone who controls the way they respond to outcomes. As he puts it, self-discipline is not about restriction. It is about liberation from everything that weakens your judgment. That insight echoes the core idea of Cleanthes, the ancient Stoic known for his relentless commitment to inner strength. In one of his most enduring teachings, Cleanthes reminded his students, "The strength you seek is the strength you build." This is where Stoicism becomes something far greater than a philosophy for coping with stress. It becomes a framework for building leaders who cannot be shaken by pressure, temptation, or chaos. Leaders who can remain calm when others panic, who choose reason over ego, who understand that their job is not to impress people but to guide them. And you cannot guide others when you are lost inside yourself. Donald brings this message to military programs, corporate trainings, and high-performance environments across America. He teaches that leadership begins in the silence before the reaction, in the moment when emotion surges and the mind has to decide whether to fight, flee, or think. Stoicism trains leaders to think, not slowly but clearly, not emotionally but intentionally. In a country driven by speed, achievement, and competition, this clarity becomes a superpower. The American leader who practices Stoicism doesn't just perform better, they project stability. Their presence calms rooms, their decisions carry weight, their discipline creates trust, and their example affects everyone around them. The truth is simple. People follow individuals who are in control of themselves. And individuals who master themselves no longer fear failure, chaos, or change. They know that the world may shake, but their mind does not have to shake with it. That is the leadership Donald Robertson has been rebuilding from the inside out. Number 5, why pain hits harder today and how Stoicism teaches you to stand firm. Across America, people are drowning in emotional pain that doesn't look like the pain of past generations. It's quieter, more internal, more psychological. It comes not from war, hunger, or physical hardship, but from comparison, isolation, overstimulation, and the pressure to be fine, even when everything inside feels like it's falling apart. Donald Robertson noticed something striking in his years of clinical practice. Americans are not suffering because life today is harder. They are suffering because they no longer know what to do with their suffering. And when you don't understand pain, pain controls you. Donald often explains this with a clarity that leaves people unsettled. It's not the emotion that hurts you, it's the story you attach to it. That insight is beautifully reinforced by the voice of the Roman Stoic Musonius Rufus, a philosopher rarely quoted in mainstream American culture, but whose teachings may be more relevant today than ever. Musonius once told his students, "We fear pain because we never practice facing it." Placed side by side, these ideas reveal the hidden crisis of the American mind. Emotional pain has become something people avoid, suppress, medicate, ignore, or drown in distractions. And because they avoid it, they never build the strength to carry it. They never learn to separate what is temporary from what is defining. They mistake discomfort for danger, uncertainty for catastrophe, sadness for failure. Stoicism flips this script entirely. Donald teaches that pain is information. It signals where growth is needed, where illusions must be shattered, where beliefs need to be re-examined. He shows people how to step back from the emotion instead of collapsing into it, how to observe fear rather than obey it, how to question sadness instead of letting it narrate their identity. This is where ancient philosophy becomes startlingly modern. Chrysippus believed that emotions are not invaders, but interpretations. They are judgments, sometimes distorted, sometimes wise, but always transformable. And Donald uses that idea to help people understand that they are not their pain. They are not the worst moment they have lived. They are not the storm that hits them unexpectedly. Pain is not identity, it is a teacher. In American culture, where comfort is abundant but meaning is scarce, this approach is revolutionary. People discover that grief does not have to consume them. Anxiety does not have to define them. Heartbreak does not have to break them. When they face their pain with clarity instead of fear, the pain loses its power to dominate. It becomes a path, a training ground, a sharpening stone. And the moment someone understands this, truly understands it, they stop running from emotional storms. Because storms no longer represent danger, they represent transformation. Number 6. How a 2,000-year-old philosophy became America's new survival skill. All across the United States, something unexpected has been happening. In a nation defined by innovation, speed, and relentless progress, millions of people are turning not to new technologies or modern self-help trends, but to a philosophy born in the streets of ancient Athens. A philosophy older than every institution in America, older than the Constitution, older than the very idea of the Western world. Donald Robertson didn't just witness this resurgence, he helped ignite it. Not by romanticizing the past, but by translating ancient discipline into a modern survival skill that Americans didn't know they needed. Donald often reminds his audiences that philosophy only survives for 2,000 years if it solves a problem that never disappears. As he once put it, we keep searching for new answers because we forgot the old ones already worked. That line resonates even more when placed beside a powerful insight from Chrysippus, the mind who shaped the entire structure of Stoic reasoning. No great thing is created suddenly, two voices separated by millennia, yet perfectly aligned. America has been trying to outrun its own mind, fix everything externally while neglecting what governs everything internally. Build wealth without stability, chase success without peace. Search for identity without self-knowledge. And in this collision of pressure and confusion, Stoicism is not returning as a trend. It is returning as a lifeline. Donald's work takes Stoicism out of history books and drops it directly into modern American reality, into military bases where soldiers prepare their minds for uncertainty, into universities where students cannot sleep because of expectations they can't meet. into boardrooms where high achievers burn out despite their accomplishments, into community centers where people search for meaning in a world that rarely slows down long enough for them to breathe. Stoicism gives these people something the culture around them rarely provides: the ability to remain steady while everything else shakes, the clarity to separate what matters from what only screams for attention, the discipline to act with intention instead of impulse. And perhaps most importantly, the reminder that peace is not found in control over life, but in mastery over the self navigating it. In a country obsessed with performance and productivity, Stoicism has quietly become the antidote. Not because it promises ease, but because it promises strength. Not because it avoids difficulty, but because it teaches people how to endure it with dignity. And that is why Donald Robertson's influence has grown far beyond philosophy enthusiasts. He has become a guide for anyone trying to stay human in an age that constantly tries to turn them into a machine. Every generation searches for something to hold on to, something strong enough to stand when life shakes, clear enough to cut through confusion, and honest enough to confront the truths we spend years running from. In this generation, for millions of Americans, that something came from a place no one expected. Not from Silicon Valley, not from celebrity self-help, not from new therapeutic trends promising instant transformation. It came from a Scottish psychologist who chose to revive a wisdom older than every crisis of the modern world. Donald Robertson didn't just study Stoicism, he rebuilt it. He brought it back into a society struggling with anxiety, burnout, and emotional overload. And in doing so, he reminded people that the mind can be strengthened, the heart can be steadied, and the human spirit can be trained. Donald often says that clarity is not something you wait for, it is something you build. You build it when you challenge your beliefs instead of surrendering to them, when you face your emotions instead of hiding from them, when you treat your mind not as an accident of biology, but as a craft shaped by practice. This message has lifted countless people from the mental quicksand that once controlled their lives. And it resonates even more when paired with one of the most enduring insights from the early Stoics. As Chrysippus taught his students, good character is the foundation of every good life. That line closes the circle. Modern psychology meets ancient philosophy. Science meets timeless discipline. America meets the wisdom it didn't know it was missing. And together they reveal a truth powerful enough to outlive every trend. If you strengthen your character, you strengthen your life. Before you go, share in the comments which idea today hit you the hardest. Your insight might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this message brought clarity to your journey, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who needs strength right now, and subscribe to the Stoic Lighthouse so more people can find wisdom in the middle of modern chaos. And stay close, because our next video will take you into one of the most intriguing power struggles in ancient history. A story of charm, strategy, and danger. A psychological duel where influence becomes a weapon and desire becomes a battlefield. A tale so layered and unpredictable that every viewer will be forced to confront their own judgment of power. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. According to Zeno, let reason guide you and no storm will ever master you. This is your lighthouse. Walk forward with clarity. See you in the next video.